Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, another college football week is in the books. Week 2 of the NFL is concluding tonight. Here at Saturday Sunday, we have so much to talk about. The landscape of the college football, the landscape of the NFL draft continues to change week in and week out. And here at Saturday Sunday, we will continue to cover it wire to wire with our NFL Draft Report show, where we go through the stock report for the draft eligible prospects, a Devy Slant Report where we talk about some of the top underclassmen, non-draft eligible prospects, and then we shift gears and transition to the NFL side of it, check back in on last year's rookie class in the NFL Rookie Report, and then conclude with a quick Dynasty Fantasy Report for anything that has dramatically shifted in the Dynasty world after week 2 of the NFL season. Running solo tonight. Hope to have somebody across the way with me next week. But tonight I will share my thoughts. So let's get right into it, because I think the story in the NFL Draft Report for this week in terms of the quarterbacks is the rise of Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. This past week, Alabama really rolled over Wisconsin. Jalen Milroe attributed to 5 touchdown passes, almost 200 yards passing, 3 touchdowns there, 75 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns there, 5 total touchdowns. And the more this season plays out, the more I start to wonder, can he emerge to potentially be QB1 in this class? He has the physical traits. He has the dual threat ability. He has the playmaking ability. He has the ability to push the ball vertically down the field with a big arm. There's a lot to like about his game. When you look at him and think like Anthony Richardson got moved all the way up to the top of the draft. Jalen Hurts went early second round, and then look at the success he's had in the league. Jalen Milroe, like athletically, physical traits wise, is not that far off those players who saw their stock rise. He's not as big as a guy like Anthony Richardson, but there's a lot to like about Milroe's game. He looks bigger, he plays bigger, his frame and stuff like that. But there's a lot to like about his game. And in a year that, Carson Beck's a good prospect. I don't think he's a great prospect. There was a shaky week from him. Georgia just got by Kentucky. Carson Beck threw for only 160 yards. He made plays when he had to at the end, but not a performance you would expect to see on a very talented Georgia team from the guy who's considered maybe a QB1 in this draft class. You have Shadu Sanders. This past week, 310 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think we know that Sanders has the traits to be potentially a successful quarterback at the next level. He can make every throw. He can move around the pocket, keep his eyes downfield. The question with Sanders is going to be, can he be a guy that you want to trust to elevate your franchise? A guy that if you put him, like, think about what Carolina looks like right now. And their report came out today that they're going to bench Bryce Young. Like, do you trust putting him in a situation with potentially a poor team, poor offensive line, lack of playmakers? He's just, and we talked about it last week, with the incumbents, there's just been enough comments and questions from him that I could see NFL teams being a little bit worried about him at the top of the draft on a bad team with questions on the O-line, questions in playmakers. So I think he's going to be a very polarizing prospect, because I do think the physical traits and the talent is there. But the rest of the stuff that comes with it, are NFL teams willing to look past that and think he could be a franchise elevator in that position? I think it's a legitimate question. Obviously, we are not privy to nearly as much information as anybody running an NFL franchise will have in terms of interviewing, talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. So Shadu Sanders and Carson Beck have been the 2 guys that have been at the top. Last week, we talked about Quinn Ewers emerging, and then this week he goes down with an injury. I haven't seen yet any definitive timeline on when Quinn Ewers will be back. Arch Manning played unbelievable in his spot duty when he came in for Quinn Ewers the other day. So, and Ewers already had development and refinement and consistency that he needed to show. You go into guys like Gary Nussmeier. I watched him this week. There's a lot to like about Gary Nussmeier's game, but he doesn't have a lot of starts, so there's not a lot on the track record. When you see him make great plays, you then see him make some bonehead scratching plays. This past week, he had a horrendous interception. Now he made up for it. LSU, that was, he had some good moments in that game. 285 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But bad decision, bad turnover at times in that game. Still very inexperienced prospect. So he might be a guy on the rise, but I don't think he's a slam dunk guy. Cam Ward has been unbelievable this past week, 346 yards and 5 touchdowns. But there's going to be some questions about his stature. There's going to be some questions about, how long he's been in college and transitioning to the next level and stuff like that. There's some inconsistencies that Cam Ward's trying to fix in his game. We saw bad decision making at times, turnover worthy plays. We haven't seen much of that this year. I don't think Miami's really been too tested yet, so I think that's coming down the pike a little bit there. But Cam Ward's an interesting guy. Connor Wegman was benched this week. Donovan Smith, has not looked like a guy who's going to emerge into a big-time NFL prospect. Riley Leonard this past week, 112 yards passing, 11 of 12. Didn't have to do much there. 100 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. We know he's a good runner. But there's question marks about his ability to process, his mental processing, his going through progressions. I said, there were people, I think it was Colin Cowherd, were like, he looks like Josh Allen out there. Yeah, maybe his rushing ability. I don't think he's Josh Allen. The arm talent is not even in the same stratosphere. Like, if at his best, Riley Leonard may have the physical traits of Daniel Jones. I don't even think he has the physical traits of Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones is a faster runner. I think Daniel Jones is a better thrower of the football, and he's got better arm talent. So to me, Riley Leonard is not even a guy who right now I'm considering a top 2-round prospect. If he really was to turn it around, maybe he could sneak into the top 100. We talked about Morgan Moses last week. He's a guy who I think's on the up. So all this being said, it kind of spins back to, where does Jalen Milroe fit into this? And he's playing for Alabama. He's putting up statistics. He's got the physical traits. He's got the athletic ability. He's got the dual threat ability. He's got the arm to push it vertically down the field and be a weapon in that regard. If he continues to show refinement in the progression reading, the mental processing, the pre and post snap reads, I think there's a real chance he can push his way into the mix. I do not think Carson Beck has locked that up. I do not think Shadu Sanders has locked that up. I think there will be questions about both of them in terms of their ceiling, their fit, their transition. I think there'll be questions about Cam Ward, how long he's been in college, his size. Jackson Dart, coming from the scheme he's coming with in Ole Miss. He had a great week this week, but there'll be questions about that. Nussmeier, lack of experience. So a lot of things could fall in Jalen Milroe's way. And when you add on top of that the Alabama bump, even without Nick Saban there, when the SEC play, and all that comes with his physical traits, I think it's at least a thing to consider that he might be able to push his way into round 1. And if he pushes his way into round 1, we saw last year Bo Nix, Michael Penix pushed their way all the way into the top 12. Who's to say Jalen Milroe can't be that rising prospect that pushes his way over Shadu, pushes his way over Carson Beck? So I think, 3 weeks into the season here, I do think there's a legitimate question on who could be QB1, who could emerge as QB1. And I don't think Jalen Milroe is out of the question based on what we've seen in the early going, plus the makeup of the kid, plus the arm talent, the physical traits. There's a lot to like about Jalen Milroe's game. So I really wanted to kind of gold star him here at the top of the show in the NFL draft report for the quarterbacks. If we take this to the running backs this past week, couple things that stood out. It's the return of Raheem Rocket Sanders. 19 carries, 143 yards, 1 touchdown for South Carolina. He looked really good this past week. He was moving like that big back that had quick feet, and once upon a time was maybe thought of as a top 50 or top 100 pick. I'm not saying he's reemerged into that, but I think he's definitely put himself on the radar. Myself included. I had questions about Braylon Allen. Bigger guy, didn't know if he was going to translate the quickness, but we're seeing Braylon Allen be effective already. He had a really good preseason, scored 2 touchdowns yesterday, a part of that Jets offense there behind Breece Hall. I think Raheem Sanders, like the ebb and flows of a prospect, once upon a time thought to be a top running back prospect maybe. Now, like before the year started, not even in people's top 10s or top 12s. Could he find his way even in a really deep class to maybe be a guy in that early day remix and be a round 4 guy and have a real shot at the next level. What we've seen so far has been impressive. His usage, his production, he looks more like the player he did earlier in his collegiate career. So that's great to see. Top running back prospect that looked the best this week, clearly Omarion Hampton, 210 yards and 3 touchdowns, heavy workload, 25 carries as well. I have Hampton right there behind Ashton Genty as one of the top running backs in this class. I had it as him and Ollie Gordon, but let me bring up Ollie Gordon. He had a pretty good week 1, but Ollie Gordon is 17 carries for 41 yards. Right now, like, he's not building momentum just yet. I think it's some other guys have emerged. Nicholas Singleton's had a very good start to the season. DJ Giddens has had a good start to the season. We've seen Omarion Hampton. Ollie Gordon, a little up and down early on here. I still like Gordon's footwork. I still like his size, his frame. A lot to like about Gordon's game, but I think right now Omarion Hampton might be leapfrogging over him in terms of what we're seeing. Devin Neal, 120 yards and a touchdown. 120 yards and then 33 yards receiving for Kansas this past week. He's another guy I think could be in that early day remix. Nate Noel, nice to see him from Appalachian State, transferred to Missouri. Missouri's got that high power offense, 121 yards rushing this week. I think he could be a guy that could be in the late day remix for sure. If we take this to the pass catchers, not much to really talk about in the tight end, so I wasn't just going to force talking about some of the tight end prospects. In terms of the wide receivers, obviously Tet McMillan just continues to do what he does, 11 catches, 138 yards. Travis Hunter, 13 catches for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Luther Burden, 6 catches, 117 yards and 1 touchdown. It's going to be fascinating to see how the NFL views these 3 top wide receiver prospects, because they really couldn't be more different in the way their size, their frame, the way they play. Travis Hunter, like 180 pounds. We know the both ways. The ball skills, the hand-eye coordination is special. Tet McMillan, like I said, he seems like a clone of like part Mike Evans, part Drake London. You don't see big men move the way he does in terms of just the general movement skills, not even talking about like a blazing 40, great ball skills at the catch point. And then you see Luther Burden, who has that. I'm not going to say he's the level of Malik Neighbors, but he's got that frame like Malik Neighbors, that like he's not he's a small guy, but he's not a guy that you worry about his frame. He's strong, he's physical, he's like the rack king in this class in terms of making people miss after the catch. So there's a lot to like about Luther Burden. It's going to be fascinating to kind of see. I think all 3 have a real shot to go top 10 or top 12, how NFL views them, who they prefer. Do they take into account the Travis Hunter and possibly playing on the defensive side as well and push him over these guys, assuming Travis Hunter says his primary position, he wants to play as wide receiver. But it's hard to see anybody else emerging to potentially get over those 2 guys. Those 3 guys in the wide receiver room. A lot of other great prospects. We're continuing to see Kyron Lacey in LSU, another touchdown this past week, a guy who's emerging. I look forward to doing a deep dive on him. Right now I've watched a little bit of film on him. Obviously, I've watched the live broadcast games of LSU, but I haven't put him in the scouting notebook just yet because I kind of want to see and have a little bit more before I do that. But he is in the rankings notebook in terms of where I have him tentatively ranked right now. Tej Johnson continues to be an explosive player for Oregon. We knew that. The questions will linger about his size and his frame, but 7 catches, 110 yards. Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech, a guy that I was a big fan of during the summer, 7 catches, 106 yards and 1 touchdown, showing that big playability as a vertical slot for VTech. Trey Harris, who I was a little bit lower on in the summer, all he's doing is going out and balling out. 11 catches, 127 yards. There are a lot of people who have him higher ranked than me. I can't get him there to like my top 5 or even top 8, but I do think I maybe have to look at him about maybe moving up a little bit in my ranks to maybe be in that top 12 to 15-ish. I just think it's such a strong class, and I do have some concerns about Trey Harris transitioning to the NFL, the speed, the separation ability. There are some concerns there for me. One guy I don't have a lot of separation concerns for and questions about is Isaiah Bond. 5 catches, 103 yards this week and 2 touchdowns. Continues to be an explosive player. He sits as inside my top 5 wide receivers. I talked about the big 3 before. We still have Emeka Egbuka, but then right there with Egbuka is Isaiah Bond. I think he could easily catapult himself. People love the speed. I could easily see him being the 4th wide receiver in this class after the top 3 at the top. So there it is, the NFL draft stock report for this week. Let's kind of take this now to the Devy Slant Report. And the Devy Slant Report, there's no way it can't start with Arch Manning out of Texas. So Quinn Ewers went down, like I said. Arch Manning steps in. His first pass is a touchdown. Next drive, he has like a 53-yard touchdown run where he's juking people and making people miss. He proceeds to finish the game 9 of 12, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then that one big rushing touchdown as well. So he attributes 5 touchdowns. Again, I haven't heard anything just yet about the status of Quinn Ewers. If we get to see Arch Manning for another game, I think eyes will be glued to that Texas game. Listen, Arch Manning decided to stay there in Texas. I think Texas is going to be really glad that they didn't let him out of the building. Kind of like all those years ago, Georgia, lost Justin Fields, who obviously, whatever he's became in the NFL, notwithstanding, he was a great NFL, great college football player, but they saw him transfer there, and go from there. But when you are looking at Arch Manning, you see poise, and he doesn't have a lot of reps. You see arm talent. You see more athletic ability than either of his uncles, Eli and Peyton. So Arch Manning, remember, he sat last year. He's draft eligible next year, 2026, not 2025, but 2026. So he's not out there with the Dylan Raiola, who we got to wait all the way to 2027, who had another great performance this week as well, and I think will be highly regarded as a prospect. But Arch Manning and Nico from Tennessee are going to be the 2 guys next year that I think from the preseason on are going to be looked at as potentially the number 1 and number 2 quarterback prospect in that draft class. So Arch Manning, really impressive debut in a more heavy workload than we've seen from him. Jackson Arnold had 97 yards rushing, 169 yards passing in Oklahoma's win. Arnold's another guy who I do expect to be in the mix, to be one of the top quarterback prospects, potentially a round 1 guy as well. So those are 3 of the Devy quarterbacks, non-draft eligible. Get them on your rosters wherever you possibly can. At the running back position, Caden Durham out of LSU, 11 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns for the freshman. I thought he looked really good. He's a guy who I think we're going to be talking about a lot over the next couple of years. Very impressive performance for Durham, and a guy who was highly regarded coming in, lived up to the billing in his first, consistent, role. And he's a guy I think he's going to be generating more and more buzz throughout this season and then into the future. At the wide receiver position, I put him down again because all Ryan Williams keeps doing is catching long touchdowns. Another 78 yards and a big touchdown for with Alabama. His working relationship with Jalen Milroe is already strong. For a true freshman, that's really impressive to see. Milroe trusts him. He's willing to give him a shot down the field vertically. And then back to Arch Manning in the Texas game, Ryan Wingo, really impressive. 3 catches, 127 yards, and the touchdown from their underclassmen, a very talented wide receiver prospect as well. So those are the guys I wanted to bring up in the Devy Slant Report. If we take this to the NFL Rookie Report, not a great week again for the quarterbacks. I watched a lot of the Bo Nix Denver versus Pittsburgh game. Bo Nix continues to really struggle to the point where a lot of concerns. I was not that high on Bo Nix coming out of it. He was more of a day 2 prospect. I understand why he got pushed up to round 1. A lot of people thought maybe he was the guy that can run Sean Payton's system. So far, he has looked really shaky. 2 more interceptions, no touchdowns. Does not look like he can push the ball too far vertically down the field. You wonder, like, he's going to get every opportunity this year, but I just don't know. I don't know if his skill set's going to translate. Hopefully we start to see improvement. But he's a guy who played a lot of games in college. I'm not sure there's a ton of refinement and development needed for Bo Nix. I do think just getting adjusted to the NFL game takes time. And I think that's what, if you're a Denver fan or a fan of Knicks, you got to hope that he just needs more time to kind of get acclimated. Denver to maybe build up the supporting cast around him better. But he's supposed to have this quarterback guru in Sean Payton there. It's supposed to be the perfect marriage of scheme and talent in terms of Payton's scheme to what Knicks does best. But right now it's been very questionable. The other prospect, the quarterback I want to talk about, is Caleb Williams. Watched that whole game last night against Houston. Continues to look very shaky. Now, we know Caleb Williams is an ultra talented prospect with rare special physical traits. We know he can make some great highlight reel plays off structure. But the biggest question mark about Caleb Williams was still like the just managing the game, play in and play out. Could he consistently win from the pocket, show that ability, and then make those special plays, right? That's what makes Patrick Mahomes so special, right? He can be a quarterback that plays within the structure of the Kansas City offense. And then when he needs to make those Superman plays, he can make them. We know Caleb Williams can make those Superman plays. There's nobody's doubting that. Nobody doubted that in the pre-draft process. But what we still haven't seen, not in college and not in his first two games, obviously not going to jump to any conclusions, still an ultra-talented prospect. But right now we've seen him struggle to kind of stay in rhythm, make consistent plays down in and down out. Now, some of that has to do, Chicago's offensive line has been very, very shaky, to say the least. They have not really got DJ Moore going. This past week, Keenan Allen missed. Rome Odunze's been off to a relatively slow start in his NFL career. So the supporting cast, not ideal. Don't love the offensive coordinator that he's attached to at the moment. But so far, Chicago should be 0-2. Tennessee gave them that game last week. Not been off to a strong start when we were all talking about maybe the best supporting cast of any, top quarterback prospect in quite some time. So yeah, the O-line's been shaky, but still a strong supporting cast to some teams out there. Hasn't been the ideal start so far for Caleb Williams. No running backs to talk about right now. Pass catchers, Brock Bowers continues to really impress me, especially the usage. 9 catches, 98 yards. They're using him all over the football field. Great to see for Brock Bowers. The receivers, Brian Thomas, 2 catches, 94 yards. But the NFL Rookie Report, I saved the best for last. Marvin Harrison, yeah, he's still pretty good at football. He can run just fine. And Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, 4 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns, basically shutting up everybody on draft Twitter who was saying how slow he was, which he was that week. He didn't look like the same guy with the play speed that we saw on film, whatever the case may be, acclimated, adjusted, whatever. This week, big plays, 2 touchdowns in like the first 6 minutes of the game, showing that body control, the ball skills that we know make him special, and he's got plenty of speed to win vertically down the field. And then Malik Neighbors for the Giants. I know the Giants came up short in that game. A lot of debacles on the Giants end, coaching, field goal kicker, defense couldn't get off the field. But Daniel Jones was competent this week, and Malik Neighbors was fed 17 targets, 10 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown. He legitimately was the Giants' offense. Whenever they needed a big play on 3rd down and 4th down, the ball went to Malik Neighbors. I know he was going up against the poorest secondary, arguably in one of the worst defenses in the NFL and in the Commanders, but Malik Neighbors off to a red-hot start so far in his NFL career, showing that ability that made him such a dynamic prospect and a top 6 overall player. Marvin Harrison didn't do much that week 1, but showed right off the bat here in week 2, equally not going to be done by Malik Neighbors with a big time performance as well. If we take this to conclude the show to the NFL Dynasty Fantasy Report for this week, couple things that we kind of got to talk about. One, the Tua injury fallout. Obviously, we don't know the status on Tua. Obviously, that's probably a decision medically related to doctors, concern about what happens if he gets another concussion, talking over with his family. But the fallout from the immediate is they don't have anybody else who can run that offense the way Tua does. It immediately hurts Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle the entire time that Tua is out during this season, drastically changing that Miami offense. They will very much lean on the run game, I think, and safe plays and occasional maybe, vertical shots, but it will be a very different style. It will not be that aggressive offense that I think that we've seen under Tua, which then hinders Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle a little bit. On the flip side, if worst case scenario happens and Tua is forced to retire due to the concussions, then I think you're talking about Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle there being some question marks for even longer term, because how quickly does Miami get the next guy in there? Is he a guy that can run Mike McDaniel's scheme as well as Tua could? How much, does that hurt the short-term and long-term value of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is a legitimate question. Obviously, we don't have a lot of answers right now. We might not have answers for weeks before they make even any type of declaration of when he's coming back, if he's coming back. So it's a little bit of a wait and see. Second, Anthony Richardson. He's been my guy for years. It wasn't a great week. If it's a buy now window because people are concerned, listen, he only had like 9 completions in week 1. It materialized into a major fantasy performance. But I'm still buying a Rich. I know this week wasn't good, and there's fallout from it with the pieces around it. I'll get to that in a second. But I still think Anthony Richardson's a very young player who only played a handful of games last year. So I think there's still going to be more. We knew there was some development and refinement needed in terms of his passing skills. But he's got those special traits. He's got the rushing ability. If people get in any way panic, even if he has another bad game, I'd still go out and aggressively buy Anthony Richardson. But on the flip side, I didn't have any shares of Michael Pittman in best ball or dynasty or any redraft this year. He was fed targets with Gardner Minshew. I don't think Gardner Minshew is a starting NFL quarterback, but he could feed his targets. And last year, Michael Pittman put up a really productive season with Gardner Minshew. I just don't think that's going to materialize with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson's going to make those highlight reel plays, those backyard plays, running around, scrambling, throwing the ball 50 yards down the field. It's not always going to fall on Pittman. He's going to have some big weeks here or there, but I think they're going to be very inconsistent. I might contemplate seeing if I could sell Michael Pittman for. I don't know if his value probably changed that much in just 2 weeks. Some people might be concerned about it, but I don't know if a lot of people in some dynasty leagues, some people might just still look at him, be a fan of Anthony Richardson, still want to be attached to Michael Pittman. So I might look to sell because I would say stock down on Michael Pittman. I am interested to kind of see what Anthony Richardson looks like when he has Josh Downs back. I think he's a guy that Anthony Richardson might really look at as like a safety valve. And I think Josh Downs could be an important part of the puzzle there once he gets back to kind of maybe keep them moving the offense a little bit more as that reliable chain mover in the middle of the field there. So I'm interested to kind of see what Anthony Richardson looks like once Josh Downs returns. Another quarterback just continues to disappoint, and no one really wants to call him out on it, but I like them coming out a lot. I think he's been an average NFL quarterback, and average is the best word you can say for Trevor Lawrence. Like, I don't think he's been better than average. So maybe it wasn't fair when people put generational on him, which we throw around too often, but I don't think he's even remotely lived up to first pick in the NFL draft type, what you expect and what people expected from him. Right now, to me, he's a run-of-the-mill average NFL quarterback. Like, if you were going to make a straight ranking, he probably falls smack dab in the middle. And I do wonder if we're even being a little generous with that solely because of what we thought about him as a prospect coming out. And if we just evaluated him on production and performance, I don't even know if he does fall in the top half of quarterback prospects, probably because there's so many poor quarterback prospects, right? So many poor quarterbacks and quarterback play in the NFL right now. But he does not look like that transcendent talent. He does not look like a guy who will elevate teammates, who can be a guy who could be a top 5 or top 6 quarterback prospect and carry a team in a playoff game. He just doesn't look like that. He got a free pass year 1 with Urban Meyer. He showed growth the next year. We were waiting for a big step last year. It didn't really happen. And now again, like, they went out and get Brian Thomas. They got, Gabe Davis. They tried to add some more vertical component to that offense. And right now the Jaguars have looked terrible in the early going. We'll see if they can kind of flip the switch a little bit and get things on track. But right now, if you're being fair, I think Trevor Lawrence has been an average quarterback at best. Not good, not very good, definitely not great. Average at best, and that might even be slightly lenient because of what we're evaluating him on, but I can't see anything more than average right now. Somewhere between slightly below average to slightly above average would be where I'd put the spectrum of what we've seen from Trevor Lawrence in his career so far in the NFL. At the running back position, stock up on James Cook. He's a guy, I was a big fan of James Cook. Right now, the Bills are really incorporating the run game. We saw him get some, carries near the goal line last week on Thursday night in that Miami game, scored touchdowns. Stock up on James Cook. I think he really has a chance to materialize this year into a definitive top 10, top 11 back in redraft dynasty circles. I know some people were questioning, does he get enough volume close to the goal line? We'll see. So far, I think he's on his way. If he's a guy who's going to score even 7 touchdowns or 6 to 7 touchdowns on top of his rushing capability, on top of his pass catching ability, I think it's going to be hard for James Cook not to finish as a top 10, top 12 back for sure. So I think stock up on James Cook. I know some people were a little worried about Ray Davis. I would not be worried about Ray Davis. There was a 2-round gap between them for a reason. One is a big play, 3-down type skill set in James Cook. One is a nice functional back in the NFL, but I don't think a guy who's going to take James Cook off the field on a consistent basis, that's going to hurt his value too much. I think the thing that hurts him the most is the games that Josh Allen just takes those short yardage touchdowns and kind of steals them from James Cook. At the wide receiver position, I already talked about Michael Pittman. I could have talked about this with Trevor Lawrence. Right now, stock down on a guy who I really like a lot, and that's Christian Kirk. I have him all over my redraft leagues, dynasty leagues, startup dynasty leagues. I am heavily invested in Christian Kirk, so it pains me to put him on this list. But right now, with Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas, the guys playing in 2 wide receiver sets on the outside, Christian Kirk only playing when they go 11 formation and 3 wides. But even that, he just right now, that Jaguars offense is really struggling. Trevor Lawrence is really struggling, and Christian Kirk is just not seeing a lot of targets. So we'll see. Evan Ingram suffered an injury this past week. I thought that might have got Christian Kirk going in terms of more usage in that short area parts of the field. It wasn't the case. We'll see if Ingram misses week 3 or beyond, and we'll see if Christian Kirk can get it going. Talked a lot about a lot of guys who've been stocked down. One guy who continues to be stocked up is Nico Collins. This is a guy who I had a lot of questions when he was coming out. Could he separate? Even after his first year, I was still questionable about what his talent could be. Houston didn't have a lot of receivers. Did he just kind of step into a situation where he was needed? But once there was better talent around him, he wasn't going to be the guy. I'll admit I was completely off on Nico Collins. I didn't expect this caliber of player at the NFL. He has morphed into a top 12-ish wide receiver in all of football, a guy who can beat any cornerback, a guy who can win down the field, the ball skills, the body control, the ability to separate late. There's a lot to like about Nico Collins' game, and he has became in a wide receiver core that is really talented, arguably the best in the league. Him, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell. I think Nico Collins has emerged as the clear number 1 there, and then Diggs and Dell kind of filling in after that. And then last guy I want to talk about, it's impossible not to say stock down on Travis Kelce. So to me, Kelce really is a guy who I think he's still going to make big plays. I think he's still going to be a guy that when a big spot in a big tight game or playoffs, Mahomes is still going to be looking for Travis Kelce. But the usage that made him an elite fantasy player, I'm not sure that's coming back. Rashee Rice is turning into a stud. He could have been on this list as a stock up, but we kind of talked about him last week, so I didn't want to bring him up again. But he continues to emerge. Xavier Worthy looks like he's going to be a weapon. We'll see if their offense changes a little bit without Isaiah Pacheco there. So maybe they do have to, use the pass game even more. Maybe they use Kelce on some short stuff, as kind of a way in place of the run game. But I just think if someone in your league is still valuing him on name brand and you can still get a first-round rookie pick for him, I think I might get out, especially if you have another tight end that could at least be a functional player. I might try to get out before, we're talking 6 months from now about Kelce, and he's really not a fantasy factor. I think people could look at the first 2 weeks of the year for an older veteran player still getting back into game shape and still sell themselves on him being a big-time weapon. They could sell the Pacheco injury that maybe forces them to throw a little bit more. So I do think there's avenues where people still might value him enough and be willing to give up something, especially if they're weak at tight end. Maybe they have David Njoku or Jake Ferguson, who are both injured, or they lost somebody else and they're a contender. They could potentially look at that as a guy that still want to buy. I would be looking to get out if I could. So So there it is in terms of the Dynasty Fantasy Report. I saw I had a live comment on YouTube from Kenny. Thanks for the comment. It says Cam Ward has 1,037 passing yards, 11 touchdowns in 3 games, and doesn't even play full games. Cam is the number 1 in the Heisman, and Milroe is number 2 right now. It's hard to argue with that. If we're talking, Heisman in terms of production, I think Cam Ward is right there. I think Jalen Milroe is right there. Their production so far this year has been fantastic. If you're new to the show, I've been a longtime fan of Cam Ward. I liked him when he was in Incarnate Wood before he even transferred to Washington State. As we think about the transitioning to the next game, I've always liked him. He hasn't been a guy that's ever been too high on rankings of people like that are a little bit more in the know in terms of, touching base with, NFL, draft scouts, for teams and stuff like that. So if he puts up this year and he's going to get a chance to play in some really competitive games, I think down the line, I think Miami has a real chance to go to playoffs. I think that could be what Cam Ward needs to maybe find his way to the top of that quarterback ranks in terms of overall big board, to maybe put himself in position to be a top 10 prospect, to be talked about right now, like we talk about guys like Beck and Shadu, and I brought up Quinn Ewers last week and I brought up Milroe before. I think Ward has the capabilities to put himself in that mix. I think we're going to be talking about these quarterbacks all year. And I think there's like 5 guys. So, Sanders, Beck, Ward, Milroe. I think Nussmeier can really rise. I think Moses from USC can Miller Moses from USC can really rise. I think there's a handful of guys that still can very much push their way into the mix. I think Milroe and Ward were probably the 2 guys that I think could maybe push into when the year started. I think people looked at Sanders and Beck in one tier, Ewers in his own tier, and then after that, guys like Milroe, Ward, Drew Alar, who of these guys can maybe take that next step. So far, I think Milroe and Ward have done the best. I think Drew Alar has shown some good signs. I think Connor Wegman and Donovan Smith have gone the other way as Milroe and Ward have emerged. But I think, I agree with you right now. He probably is number 1 in the Heisman voting, and Milroe might be right there behind him for sure. Thanks again for the comment. Appreciate it, Kenny. So if you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, SS Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out our premium content tab. For $9.99, you can get access to all our premium content. You get 3 notebooks, all for the price of $9.99. If you purchase it now, you get access immediately to the rankings notebook. It has all different rankings, draft eligible rankings for the 2025 class. It has Devy rankings. It has Dynasty rookie rankings for last year's rookies, the 2024 class, updated throughout the NFL season. And it also has positional overall Dynasty rankings as well. You get the scouting notebook immediately, which has almost 80 to 90 detailed scouting reports already for the offensive skill players for this draft class, strengths, functional areas, developmental areas, how they win, NFL role, fit, and fantasy ceiling. That will be added to, like I already on the short list, Garrett Nussmeier, first quarterback that's going to be added. Kyron Lacey, first wide receiver that's going to be added. So those will be added throughout the year. A lot of updates to the players that are already in there. And then obviously tons of updates in the pre-draft months as well. You get those 2 immediately for $9.99. And then in April, you also get the draft projections notebook as well. We'll have thoughts on over 400 prospects in there, plus their combine measurements, combine testing numbers, and all that fun information, projecting how I expect them to come off the board based on everything I'm hearing, reading, and listening. So that's always a great task, trying to project who's going to come off the board, how they're going to come off the board. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.